One of the best pieces of guidance and advice I was given was to go and learn from the best. Seek out those elite sellers on your team or on the other teams surrounding you. Get some time with them, sit down with them, and figure out what they do well, right? And so I think that was where I had my first lesson and first glimpse into the fact that we win together and we lose together. Like, we can't be lone wolves just trying to chip away at opportunities, trying to grow the business on our own. These elite sellers had great relationships with every single piece of that ecosystem.
Welcome to another episode of the Elite Selling Podcast. We are your hosts, Frankie and Griffin. Today, we have got an incredible guest for you. We've got Jennifer Chang. Jennifer is the Regional Sales Director for U.S. Federal at Cisco AppDynamics. Jennifer is bringing over 16 years of selling experience to today's podcast. She's been at companies like AppDynamics, VMware, Zoom, 10 plus years at Cisco. And one thing unique to Jennifer that she's bringing to the podcast today, Jennifer actually started her career in procurement and then transitioned to selling. So we're going to get some of the procurement inside baseball on today's episode. But today, the major focus and the topic of conversation is going to be around how elite sellers leverage and build their ecosystem. So we're really excited to jump into today's topic and episode. Before we do, if you're listening to this, if you're liking the podcast, do us a favor. Like, share, subscribe, get your friends to join, right? We love the support that we're getting from our listeners. We want to continue to bring great episodes like this. Without further ado, here is Jennifer.
Jennifer, welcome to the Elite Selling Podcast. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Frankie and Griffin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I know. This is a long time coming for you and me. We've been friends for a while. We've worked together. I learned a ton from you, and we've done a few cool different things together in our professional career. So excited for all of our guests to hear and learn from your wisdom. But Jennifer, before we jump in, if you're not on video, you got to turn video on and check it out, listeners. Tell us about the story of that Viking hat behind you, the Viking helmet, I should say.
Thank you for asking, Frankie. That is actually my Barbarian helmet. The Barbarian Award was one of the big competitive takeout awards at Cisco. So when I started my career there as an account manager, I took on an ABC account. We call that anything but Cisco, and really planted the seeds. It was a win 2 years in the making. And once we were finalists for the award at the public sector level, that went up to the Americas level, and we were one of 6 finalists. But then it went to the worldwide level, where each region had 6 different finalists that had to vote. And so each region had 2 votes per area. So everybody in America used their 2 votes there, but then you had to use 2 votes for Asia Pac, 2 votes for EMEA. And at the end, there were 6 worldwide winners. And I'm really happy to announce that our team was one of those winners. So each of us received a Barbarian helmet as well as a cash award.
Come on, let's go. And if you don't know anything about Cisco, to be a top 6 to get that award, I think Cisco's got like 25,000 sellers. So we're not talking about a 10-person sales team. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people that you had to compete against. So this award is probably, the deal that you won was probably next level. So buckle up. It's going to be a great conversation. We're learning from the best here. So Jennifer, we're excited for this topic. We're going to be talking about how to make your ecosystem work for you as a seller. So let's jump into that. Why are you so excited to share that? Give us a little bit of your overview on that.
Yeah, well, I think, when we talk about the Elite Selling Podcast, for me, the one thing that elite sellers have in common is they know how to make their ecosystem work for them. And the next question, probably Griffin and Frankie, you're going to ask, okay, what does the ecosystem mean, right? That means every single person, every single resource that touches an opportunity from pre-sales all the way to post-sales. So from your engineering partner to business development, proposal teams, product solution specialists, your channels team, your channels partner, your leadership team, your legal team, your finance team, your customer ecosystem, right? I think a lot of sellers, they look at their customer champion and the end user and they kind of stop there. But customer ecosystem also means procurement. How do you talk to procurement? How do you move that move that deal along and create that sense of urgency so that procurement officer is actually issuing the PO in the timeline you're hoping for that forecast.
And I appreciate the overview of the ecosystem. When did you really realize that it was so important to leverage the ecosystem? Was there a turning point in your career, or was there sort of an aha moment where you said, "Look, this is the right way, or this is a way that I know is going to consistently work"? I'm just curious if there was a specific time or moment where not leveraging the ecosystem gotcha.
Yeah, that's a great question, Griffin. I think when I first started at Cisco, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, one of the best pieces of guidance and advice I was given was to go and learn from the best. Seek out those elite sellers on your team or on the other teams surrounding you. Get some time with them, sit down with them, and figure out what they do well, right? And so I think that was where I had my first lesson and first glimpse into the fact that we win together and we lose together. Like, we can't be lone wolves just trying to chip away at opportunities, trying to grow the business on our own. These elite sellers had great relationships with every single piece of that ecosystem. They were able to pull levers when other sellers could not. And when I saw that that was the common thread they had in common, then I said, okay, well, I need to figure out how to do this as well. Let me make sure that I'm doing the research, figuring out who touches these deals, figuring out who like the big dogs are at the company as well, right? Because some of those distinguished engineers are really going to be the ones to come in and show that thought leadership to your end users and help you to move the needle. So all of those things were so important. But I think for me, again, it was that great guidance and coaching I received when I first entered into Cisco, and then the knowledge that I sought out from those elite sellers. And I was like, just, sponging up their knowledge and trying to learn the most I could from them.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about it takes so many different people to go in and close these monumental deals, to go and win that Barbarian Award, for example. I mean, you didn't do that alone, and I know you're going to testify to that, but you can't just go in and ask somebody for a favor that you don't have a relationship with, meaning within your existing organization. So tell us about how you build those relationships ahead of time so that when you need that distinguished engineer or somebody high up within the company, like, they're going to pick up Jennifer's phone call and say, yes, let's do this. Let's make it happen.
Oh, that's such a great question, Frankie, because obviously urgency and being able to help move that needle doesn't come overnight. I think first and foremost, and we all know this, right, as sellers, it's building that relationship, building that trust, figuring out how to get to a place of true collaboration. That comes with getting to know the person, right? You don't want that first call to be, hey, I need this from you. You want that first call to be, hey, this is who I am. I've heard great things about you. I've heard that you were instrumental in closing XYZ deal. Like, I'd love to learn from you, right? Like, talk to me about how you prefer being communicated with. And if I do have an opportunity coming up, how I can make sure that that's prioritized on your list. And so a lot of those answers that came back were, being respectful of their time, right? Not having things be last minute. Sometimes those things are out of our control, but always approaching that communication with a lot of respect. Nobody owes you anything. So you have to be able to speak that common language and figure out, okay, what is that common goal that we're all striving towards? And how can I ensure that even if this is a small deal, like, we can plant the seeds and set the stage for it to grow into even larger deals? Because some of those real, like, hard resources to get, those true distinguished engineers, they want to know the whole picture. They're not going to just drop everything for a 200K deal, right? They want to know, hey, this is what it can build into, and here's why it's important.
So I was going to say that, Jennifer, I totally get that. And the relationships that you build, you don't really know when you're going to need them until you do. And if you take the mentality of the lone wolf, you especially at a larger organization, Frankie and I have both been at smaller organizations, been at larger organizations, especially at those large orgs where you might be up against a timeline. And if you have a relationship with someone internally that's going to go to bat for you, that could be the difference between you getting a deal and not getting a deal. At end of quarter, end of fiscal year, because you have that relationship that you can either text or call or lean on them, and they're going to prioritize your request because you have that relationship, versus someone coming in completely cold and they don't have that relationship with you. They may deprioritize that, especially if you've been rude to them or in the past, right? So that's one of the nuances. But the other thing that you mentioned that really resonated was, again, the relationships that you build. It's a team sport selling. They might see opportunities in an account that you don't, right? The engineering counterpart or the customer success manager or your sales engineer or even your manager, they may have a different perspective, different point of view, see a different path that you don't see. And that could be the difference between you making your number or not, because they see pipeline as an opportunity that you might not see. Has that ever happened to you before? Or, when you leverage the ecosystem from a pipeline generation perspective, or pre-VO, what we call pre-VO, visible opportunity?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I think that all of those different eyes on your deal and the skill sets that the ecosystem brings to you is so helpful. And Griffin, like you said, like I've had finance, right? Say, hey, if we get creative around this financing, we may be able to turn this 3-year EA into a 5-year EA. I've had different product sales specialists say, hey, technically their long-term strategy involves XYZ technologies. If we can bake that in now or seed that in now, we're going to be able to grow this opportunity in the next year. And I love having those experts come in and be able to put their eyes on it, encourage that we look at things in a more creative and innovative way. And Griffin, before I forget, because I wanted to circle back to what we just spoke about, I want to make sure that the sellers listening to this know the importance of expressing gratitude after the deals are closed or even during the process. If someone's really going above and beyond for you, dropping things because, again, we can't plan for everything, make sure you're sending that note afterwards and CC their boss, right?
Yeah.
Like so many of us, we get negative feedback at times, and I don't know if everyone takes the opportunity to provide that positive feedback. And it just goes a long way, right? So for all the sellers listening out there, make sure you're expressing that gratitude and appreciation, and make sure that person's leadership's aware of that too.
Love
Yeah.
that.
The one thing I love now with all the software out there that can tell you the people that have touched deals is, before I go and write up my win report on a deal that I've won, I'm like, okay, did Joe, Susie, everybody that was a part of the deal, like you got to make sure that you give them the shout out that they deserve. And like the worst thing that you can do, to your point, is go and post a win wire and then like leave a key person out, and that's just like the worst feeling that you can have. So selling is a very human thing to do, and there's people that help you along the way. So it's such an important thing that you mentioned around expressing gratitude, giving them the shout out and the kudos that they deserve. So one thing that I learned once I started to do more sizable deals is like thinking about the final steps of selling that people don't talk about. Like it's one thing to go in, get your customers and prospects excited, but when it comes down to like navigating the paper process, navigating InfoSec or security, those people within your role, within your company are so critical. I'd be curious, like your take on the latter half of closing these deals and how to really work with like legal or security team on your side so that you can get those things prioritized. I know it's a little bit more of like in the weeds, but it's not something we really talk about much on here.
Yeah, that's a great question, Frankie. So again, like, in the spirit of the ecosystem, right? Oftentimes in situations like that, especially because we're talking about the final stages and terms and conditions, red lines, those pieces, I often have to call on the big guns, right? Whether it's my leader, my leader's leader, one of our executives to help to move that needle, because depending on where you are in the organization, that legal team, that finance team, SecOps team, they have a ton on their plate, right? They don't understand where this opportunity is at in the quarterly forecast or end of year forecast. They don't understand, how many steps that we've already taken to this place. And maybe it's literally just those two things that have to be completed. So I really try and gauge that and let leadership know above, hey, if this is instrumental for end of year, end of quarter, we need to make this call. We need to help prioritize with this team in a manner that's respectful to everyone, because again, they have so much on their plate. I think I've told you guys before that, I started my career as a procurement officer. So I had so many RFPs, POs on my desk, and I needed a phone call at times to figure out, okay, what should I put at the top of my desk? the vendors that called me made the effort to actually get to know me and also convey the urgency around the deal in a manner that spoke to me. So, like, oftentimes my end user was their end user. So, being able to speak that language and know that this customer has to meet specific project milestones was what helped bring their paperwork to the top of the pile.
Can we just double down on that for a second? Because I think that that's something you just mentioned. I don't want us to skip past for our listeners, where you mentioned the sellers that stood out were the ones that, what did you say? They spoke to you, or they aligned to your specific in procurement needs and requirements. Can you help us understand what that to you in your world of procurement? Because again, let's call it out. Let's not move past that. You started your career as a procurement officer in procurement and then transitioned into sales. Very unique. And I think that there's a lot of experience and insights that you can provide to our listeners. But let's start there. Is how did that sales rep or those sales reps align to you, and what were some of those goals?
Yeah, I think similarly, right, to making your trusted folks internally at a company help to move your deal, your procurement officer is going to be that person as well. And so that person, that seller, that vendor calling me and saying, hey, first of all, one, getting to know me, right?
Yeah.
Having it be collaborative, building that relationship, not just, putting their hand out and saying, where's my PO?
Yeah.
I have a forecast to hit, right? I didn't know what that meant as a procurement officer. But what I did know is that they were to call and say, hey, I'm working with Joe Smith on this specific deal with space systems at this specific area of the company. They have a project milestone that needs to be met, and this gear, has to be on dock by this date. Okay, great. That helps me to understand, because Joe Smith is also my customer who has told me, hey, please prioritize my deal, or who has communicated with me on some level to expect this paperwork to come through. So knowing that we already have that in common, right? We both are serving the same end user. And then I'm learning from this vendor, oh my gosh, like there is like a significant drop dead date that this gear has to be on site. Let me make sure I prioritize this. But again, like the key piece here, Griffin, is that I've already heard and gotten to know this person ahead of time, right? They're not just calling me out of the blue. And so I think that taking that extra step before we know that deals are going to be in the hopper is so critical. Like procurement officers don't want to get that phone call and get, hey, nice to meet you. And by the way, I need XYZ.
Yeah.
Not great.
Yeah, they're usually treated like an afterthought, unfortunately. So building that relationship ahead of time. And what's your take on doing it through your main coach or champion or mobilize or whatever you want to call it in the deal that you've been working on from your customer or prospect side? Do you feel the need that you need to go get that intro from them, or do you think that's something you could reach out directly? It's probably like a case-by-case basis, but curious your take there.
Yeah, it is case by case, Frankie. That's a great question. Depending on the size and the scope of the deal, right? Like, I don't think that a vendor calling the champion and poking them to help, call procurement is a bad thing. But I also think procurement officers can be very sensitive. So I think that communication really has to be upfront with the procurement officer first, and almost have this like collaborative conversation again, where you're like, hey, do you think it would help if I called Joe or Mike, to help, share their project milestones with you as well, so that we can triangulate this data and all be, rowing the boat in the same direction. I think those types of things are a little bit better than just the vendor going straight to the champion and having them hammer on procurement, right? This has to be a collaborative type of movement so that we can all, again, be rowing that boat in the same direction.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
Well, some of my best champions I've ever had were actually in procurement. I mean, now that there was one account that I had, years back that it was a large account, and I struggled to get to some of the technical users and champions, but there was one person in procurement that I just continued to, like you said, get to know outside of the normal sales process. It was when we, I think there's a famous saying, champions are built when you're not selling something, like when there's no active sales cycle. And so it was just us getting to know each other. And oftentimes this person would ping me asking if we had a solution for a product that was up for an RFP. And that probably would never have come from a technical user, right? It came from procurement. And so I think that there's such value in developing procurement as a friend and champion. That's such an easy way to distinguish and separate yourselves as a sales rep.
Yeah, I agree, Griffin. And that made me think about something else too. because having been in procurement, right, and then moving into sales, being able to speak to procurement and saying, hey, something that we've seen recently is potential gray market gear. And I'd love to help you, add in some requirements into this RFP to help ensure the security and criticality of this project, right? Like being able, again, to speak their language and say, hey, we're trying to make your job easier here so it doesn't have to go out to rebid. Like, we're very open to that. But again, speak our language, right? Tell us about the criticality of what's been going on. Tell us that some of the customers have, received gray market gear, have had to go through a lengthy return process, ended up spending more money in the long run, etc. So those types of pieces, right? If you can kind of nail down those care abouts for your specific procurement officer with the technology or whatever you are trying to sell them, it can be really helpful because procurement officers do appreciate, like, they don't want to do the process again either. So how do we make it right the first time?
Yeah, and you've taken so many people through the procurement process, and you have probably, if you've been established or even if not, like you have a list of potential requirements that'll set you up as a differentiator against your competition. So go make your procurement person's life easier, give them those requirements, and then at the same time, you're able to set yourself apart from your competitors by stating things that only you can do or maybe you have the expertise on. So such a good point there. I want to shift gears here kind of as the part two to this conversation that I thought was really interesting as we were prepping. And that's the part two is once you have these relationships with your internal ecosystem and then even external ecosystem where you're not just selling to one person, but you're selling up and down internally within your organization to say, why should somebody want to work with Jennifer? And then you're also selling up and down the external organization and meeting those people where they are. You're ultimately going to start to get asked to move up within your org or to look for the next role. So I'd love to learn a little bit about your experience of going from an individual contributor to being tapped into sales leadership and climbing up the ranks as you've done. Like, tell us a little bit about your mindset going into that.
That's a great question, Frankie. And I think that I first need to caveat all of it by saying that a common theme in my career has been other leaders and mentors seeing something in me before I saw it in myself. So I don't necessarily think that my path was the most conventional. It wasn't like I was raising my hand at the first leadership opportunity saying, pick me, right? It really was the encouragement of the leadership team around me. But I think that, in having that journey and in being able to debrief with them since then, some things that they recognized in me, right, were what was the ability to take these accounts, right, grow them from nothing into these very strategic top tier accounts, looking at how I could use the ecosystem to work for me, to work for the integrated team, to work for the company, to work for the customer, and how I stepped into that true, quarterback role, right, as an account manager. And I've been told before too to always show up for the role that you want. So really being able to approach your business as the regional sales leader for your territory or being the CEO of your territory, those pieces were some of the things that were seen in me, which is why I was encouraged to take that path.
And talk to us a little bit more about what your leaders saw in you. I mean, this doesn't sound like this is an isolated incident, or we could take it that path, but we could also talk a little bit about what you look for in your team. Potential leadership qualities and capabilities, and when you're hiring, what are some of the key characteristics that you look for that signal, hey, wow, this seller or this person, this individual has a bright future in front of them, and this is someone that I want to develop.
Oh, Griffin, great question. We're going to take it both ways, right? Like, it's actually funny you asked, about what those leaders saw in me. I just had a conversation with one of those SVPs recently, and he said, I remember specifically, I was in a leadership program, and he told me he wrote in his notebook, bold. Like, he thought I was bold back then, right? And that was before I even knew I was on some track. So that was really cool to hear from him, that there were just certain characteristics, being able to communicate clearly, right? And then to be able to help motivate and inspire. I think a lot of those things pulled through in why I was encouraged to move into the leadership path.
Awesome.
On your second piece, yeah, you're talking about hiring practices, right? I love talking about this because there are a couple of key characteristics I definitely look for. Obviously, coachability. self-awareness, but also humility, right? The humility piece is so critical. And it's one of the things that I tell my teams often. Hey, the sooner you can fall on the sword, own up to the fact that you've made a mistake. Maybe you overcommitted, right? Maybe you need to bring this deal back. Maybe the opportunity has sized down, etc. Go to your leader immediately, talk about it. Or if you've made a mistake, right? Fall on the sword, admit it, and figure out collaboratively how to move forward from that. But my number one piece of hiring advice is Mark Zuckerberg actually talks about this at Meta. And he talks about always hiring someone that you can see yourself work for someday. And I love that, right? Like, I think there is like so much of a je ne sais quoi that you can't put your finger on at times with candidates, but you see something special in them. And think about all of us, right? Having been in this industry for so long, uh, some people want to be leaders. Some people want to continue to move up the chain, and some people are really okay, where they're at because they're making a lot of money at the IC level and they love that. And that's like where their strength is. So the person you hire today can easily be that next VP or CRO. And you want to be able to look for that talent and say, hey, you know what? Like, I can develop and cultivate this person. I see something special in them, and I would be willing to work for them someday.
Those are two great points. I was just writing down some notes. I think to summarize what you just mentioned, the first piece for the IC, if you're trying to go to the next level or even make more money in your current job as an individual rep, they're going above and beyond, right? They're not just doing their job, they're not doing the bare minimum, but they're meeting up and down with the ecosystem like we've talked about. They're probably helping other reps. They might be helping other team members within the organization, signing up for projects. I mean, of course, you got to make sure like you're hitting your number, exceeding your number, but they're doing way more than just that. So that's from the IC level. And then from the second piece, surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you, whether you're a rep or a leader. I think it might even be more challenging as a leader because you have to be humble enough and self-aware where you've got to bring in people that might be smarter than you, that might, if you have a low sense of self, think that it could be a threat to you. But what you've done is you've figured out a way to bring other people in so that you could rise in the ranks together. So I just love that you make those points. It's so good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So any other lessons or just key takeaways from what we've talked about today? Anything else you'd like to share that we haven't touched on those two major topics?
Yeah, Frankie, you made me think of something just now with what you shared, and that's around, those really top high achieving sellers and how they often do like, turn around to help others. I actually had a conversation with one of my top sellers this year, and I said to him, I said, hey, you're having an incredible year, right? You're going to blow it out. You're likely going to get one of the top honors at Cisco, but here's the deal. And I shared with him, I'm like, the true top sellers are the ones that turn around and make sure that others are being helped along the way. And he, in the interest, right, of like being humble, he saw that and he understood it. And he has since then stepped into this great leadership role on the team, helping others, putting best practice trainings together. I've just loved seeing that evolution with him. And I think the other component, when you talk about like, hey, does an IC want to move into a sales leader role? It definitely then becomes the we before me, right? As a top elite seller, oftentimes it is, hey, I want to hit that number. I want to blow out that number. I want to make the team as much money as possible. But if you're really looking to make that move, remembering there's a mindset shift. And so I want to make sure that I call that out, because oftentimes, they've always said a super account manager doesn't always equal a super sales leader. So things to keep in mind.
So just out of curiosity, I love that your rep is giving back, and you mentioned doing some best practices training. I thought what you were going to say is, hey, the best reps, they always PG and make sure that they are ready for next year. I thought that's where we were going to go with that one. But no,
they do that
great.
As well. I mean, it's always an and both, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, but to the best practices piece here, Frankie and I, we talk a lot about where reps are struggling right now in July of 2024. Where are reps really seeing opportunities for improvement? I think it varies org by org, rep by rep. I'm just curious if you see in those best practices meetings that your top rep is leading, what are some of the key areas of focus? Is it more product training? Is it more sales process training? Is it more leveraging the ecosystem. I'm just curious, what are maybe some of the topics of training?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the best practices training, like, so I guess like, let me take this both ways, right? Like,
Yeah.
PG is critical. And any elite seller is always looking 6, 9, 12, 16 months out, right? Like, you're always planning and making sure that you're planting those seeds. This specific best practices training was around the internal ecosystem because there's so much historical institutional knowledge that he has. And I think that I tapped in with him and I said, hey, I'm like, I think this team could learn from that. You've been here, you're probably one of my most tenured reps. So let's tap into that institutional knowledge you have and share it with others because, again, there's so much of that internal ecosystem that we need to leverage to be successful. And I think a lot of these reps, weren't sure where all the bodies were buried, candidly. So it was great to have him put that together.
Awesome.
Yeah, knowledge sharing, never a bad thing among sellers. And I think I've been in orgs where it's put your head down, hit your number, don't talk to anybody else, and then orgs that do what you're talking about. And it could vary team to team within bigger companies. So kudos to you and your team for making that happen. And I think there's going to be a trickle effect across each rep that will share those best practices. So such an important thing to note there. So Jennifer, as we wrap up with the last couple questions here, the second to last one is any resources that you recommend, whether it's books, podcasts, people to follow. Any thoughts around that?
Yes. Well, I mean, first and foremost, obviously to all the listeners, keep listening to the Elite Selling Podcast.
We paid you to say that.
They did not. They did not. I promise. But along those notes, Frankie, I thought about this, and one of the things I really encourage folks to do when you come across another seller or another leader that you really admire and you respect, ask them for their top 3 books. And it doesn't have to be a book in the selling arena, right? But being able to add that to your repertoire and learn from that, you take a little nugget from each of those leaders and sellers, and it just makes you a better human, a better person, a better leader, a better seller, all of those components. Like, I take those little nuggets and I think that I learn a little bit more from that person that I respect as well. So that would be, one of my top pieces of guidance. And then your next question might be, hey, like, what are your 3, top books at this moment? And I'll share with you, I mean, for me, right, The Qualified Sales Leader. So the lessons from a 5-time CRO, I think it's awesome to read, even if you're not a sales leader. It tells you a lot about the different pitfalls as a seller that you can fall into and how to avoid them. And then Brene Brown's Dare to Lead has been life-changing for me, and I think also for my marriage, because it talks a lot about communication, how clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So how can we approach conversations? And one of the things I always like to say is, hey, I'm going to provide this feedback to you with the best of intentions in my heart. And, here are some of the things that I'm observing. And I also like to approach, feedback by saying, I heard this, right? The story it told me was this. I believe that, your intentions probably weren't that, but let's talk about it. And, kind of being able to put that person off guard and have that open and honest conversation. That's some of the coaching that I give to others and some of the conversations I have with my own husband, right? Hey, hon, when you did this, like, the story it told me was you didn't care. And you're like, no, that wasn't the case, right? And then a gift that I received a couple of years ago that I try and read every day, The Daily Stoic, right? Just putting you in a great mindset for the day, gratitude, appreciation, taking a look at your life and understanding the perspective of it all, right? I mean, we're very lucky to be in the industry we're in, and there are a lot of, other things that kind of come at us, this noise, trying to eliminate that and really have gratitude for what the universe has given to us.
Dang, we got sales advice, marriage advice, and just overall well-being advice. Let's go.
I think we got to start asking that, Frankie, is like, we have these sales leaders on. We just got to start asking what are your top 3 favorite books and go from there. Put a list together, put a book list, put a book club together.
The Elite Selling Podcast book list. I love it.
Oh
yes.
My gosh.
Watch out, Oprah.
Bring it on.
I love it. Awesome. Well, that's the next step. You'll be our first subscriber. Jennifer, we appreciate your time. We always wrap the podcast with the same question. I think we've hit on some of your answer in the podcast already, but we'd love to understand and know your definition of an elite seller.
Yes, we did talk about, but yeah, the elite seller knows how to make the ecosystem work for them, right? They are respected. They are collaborative. They know how to build bridges. And that's my best definition. And I've seen that in all the different organizations that I've worked in.
I love that. Beautiful.
Words to live by. Build
Absolutely.
bridges. Come on.
Yep.
Gotta
Jennifer,
build bridges.
thank you for joining us. This is an awesome conversation. I have 2 full pages of notes here, and I'm definitely going to listen to this again. So thank you for being a part of our podcast.
Thank you, Frankie and Griffin. It's been an honor, and thank you to all the Elite Selling podcast listeners.
All right, that's a wrap. Jennifer, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. Listeners, we hope that you got as much value out of the podcast as Griff and I did. A few key takeaways. Work your ecosystem. There's so many smart people internally within your organization and even externally, the customers that you interface with, the prospects that you work with. Go find the people that you aspire to be like within your organization. Go pick the top reps within your company. Go ask them to grab a virtual coffee. Go meet with them in person. Go meet with, legal. Go meet with finance, different organizations outside of just a selling silo that sometimes we live in. Jennifer laid it out so well during the episode. So be sure to go and navigate those resources you've got within the company. Also, surround yourself with people smarter than you. Like Jennifer said, be humble enough to ask for help. Be humble enough to say, I don't know the answer to the question, and really go out there and make sure that you're winning as a team. Another great point that she made is that you can't win alone. If you try to do that, you're probably going to lose alone. So make sure you're asking for help and getting as much input from people within the company. So Jennifer, thanks again for joining us. If you are liking the show, please like, subscribe, share this with your friends. We appreciate you listening. See you next time.